next up, we're going to be talking about piloting, very important for the industry. And I'm delighted to welcome from bio-based Pilot Plant Europe, Nico Snoeck. Is Nico in the room? Hello.
All right, great. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm excited to be here today with you in Omaha. My name is Nico Snoeck. I'm representing today bio-based Europe Pilot Plant, and I want to talk a little bit more about scaling industrial biotechnology. And we already had, from the previous speaker, a very great example on using corn and turn it into propane diol. Now, let me explain you a little bit more for those who are not familiar with our company about bio-based Europe Pilot Plant. Well, actually, we are one of Europe's largest open access piloting facilities. And with piloting facility, we very much focus on doing process development and scale up. So how do we get a new process out of the lab and turn it into an industrial, scalable production process like you've just seen for propane diol. We are an open access facility, open access meaning that we are accessible for everyone. So whether you are a startup organization still in the lab, that doesn't matter to us, or whether you're a large corporate in need of piloting, we are here basically to help everyone. And of course, we're located in Europe, we're located in Belgium at the very heart of Europe. We've been doing piloting for the past 15 years or so, so we have great experience in that. And we are actually a not-for-profit organization, so the advantage of that is that we are a fully independent facility. So we are independent from any other companies. There are no shareholders, there is no conflict of interest with any other companies, and we are also fully independent from our government. So no Belgian, no European government, so that we can basically follow our own course, and that we are a fully mission-driven company. And our mission, in that sense, is very clear. It is really to enable the transition to a sustainable bioeconomy. If there's one thing that you have to remember from my presentation here today, is that we, as facility, we want to turn grams into tons. As I just mentioned, we want to bring the new bioproducts, the new lab processes out of that lab and turn them into an industrial economical production process. We want to see products, new bio-based products, onto the market. So that is really capturing in, let's say, one slide what we are trying to achieve. Now, how do we do that? Well, basically, we do that by offering services, and our services are basically divided in 4 big chunks. First part, of course, is about research and development. It is focusing mainly on process development, so we don't perform any strain engineering or genetic engineering, although very interesting, of course, but we focus on the process itself. For example, how do you purify propane diol from your fermentation mixture into a pure product? That is the question that we are answering in the lab, testing out a whole bunch of different unit operations. Then, second part, and of course for us the most important part, is the scale-up aspect. And so how can we get this process out of the lab into in a large industrial process? And at the scale-up part, we try to use small industrial scale equipment to really validate that laboratory process at scale. Typically, or in a second instance, we also want to produce maybe the first tens of kilos of product, or maybe the first hundreds of kilos of a certain product, so that our customers can make use of that product to do all of their testing that they want to do, whether it's a formulation test, whether it's a sensory test, whether it's toxicities testing, whether it's field trials. You typically need much more product at that stage of your development than what you can achieve in the lab. Then, hopefully you are successful in scaling, then we can also start producing. We offer also custom manufacturing services, which is focusing on what we call market entry production. So let's say the first tons of a certain product that you want to sell to your customers, so that you can basically generate with your new product the first revenues on that, ramp up your business case, build the relationship with your customers, until a point that, let's say, the demand of your product is that high that you can access a large manufacturing toller, or that you can maybe build your own production facility. And if you want to build your own production facility, also there we can help, as we also offer engineering services specifically for fermentation plant design. Now, we as an organization, we position ourselves as a one-stop shop, and we want to start from a renewable biomass or renewable feedstock, whether it is corn sugar, whether it's corn stover, whether it is corn husks. In that sense, for us, it doesn't matter. We want to use renewable feedstocks and turn them into new bio-based processes. And we basically use 3 key technologies. And the main technology for us is, and that's also the reason why I'm here today and talk about industrial biotechnology, so fermentation processes. And next to that, of course, also related biocatalysis, and to some lesser extent also green chemistry. And we want to use downstream processing, and we want to finally purify all the products that we make into a refined product. And the scope of the facility is very broad. We produce for different sectors, ranging from feed sector, so for example, single-cell protein, to the food sector, like alternative protein, alternative fats, specialty sugars, flavors and fragrances. That is all possible within the facility, but also for agricultural. I'm thinking about biopesticides, for example, and we already saw the example of before. Also, biochemicals is part of the scope. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about scaling industrial biotechnology, and I often get the questions, but how do you effectively scale, or what are the challenges you see in scaling? And when I'm thinking about industrial biotechnology, or when I'm thinking about fermentation, first thing that comes into my mind is oxygen transfer. So how do I get sufficient oxygen in my bioreactor? Because the more oxygen you typically can supply, the more productive your system will be, and that your productivity has a direct impact on your cost of goods. And how you're doing that, if you're working in the lab, you see on the left top picture, when you're working in a lab bioreactor system, I mean, it is in glass. You cannot put any pressure on that. Those systems are typically also over-designed and are very, very different than a big scale tank, a production tank, what you see on the right picture. There, I mean, those tanks are maybe 10, 15, 20 meters high. The hydrostatic pressure you have on that tank alone has a tremendous impact on your oxygen transfer. And that is why at the BioBase Europe pilot plant, we basically offer for fermentation really everything from 1 liter in the lab all the way up to 75,000 liter bioreactors, so really pre-production bioreactors, to basically cover that entire fermentation development process. And it's also one of the reasons why we've been investing for already a long time in mass spec off-gas analysis, so that we have real-time OUR, so oxygen uptake rate data of the fermenter system. Because in the end, you want to control, or when you're developing your process, you want to control it on OUR. And you want to avoid, when you're doing production with your fermenters, you want to avoid blowing basically too much air in your system, that at some point you are flooding your impellers, that it's actually much better to maybe lower your aeration to have a better oxygen transfer. Or you want to, another example is that you want to avoid, in the end, stirring too much. That the additional stirring that you do also has no effect on your oxygen uptake rate, because basically if you stir too much or if you blow too much air, I mean, it's just dissipating energy, it's wasting energy, and if you're wasting energy, you're wasting money. So that is for sure something that you have to avoid, and that's why it's important to focus your development on OUR control. A second point that I want to make, that I often recommend to my customers when they are developing their fermentation process, is robustness testing. It's very important to understand how your process will behave if there's maybe a deviation in your feed rate, if maybe the operator adds too much antifoam to your bioreactor, or if there's a sudden OTR crash, oxygen crash, because there is a small power outage. That's important data to understand how your system behaves. The more forgiving your fermentation will be, the higher your chances in the end of success. And the same is true in the end when we're talking about downstream processing development. At the pilot plant, we offer, or we try to offer at least, many different unit operations. We work with modular, flexible, and mobile equipment, actually, to really have multiple technologies in-house from the small scale, but also for the larger scale, because the way that you are developing a process is very different for the different molecules that we're working with. For example, if you want to scale a surfactant that's foaming like hell on the right picture, or a product that is not settling at all, or maybe a product like propanediol when you're starting to concentrate it or to purify it is also toxic, it's flammable. So the way that you are purifying all of those products, I mean, that really determines how you engage in your downstream process development. Because in the end, the downstream is always a contemplation between, on the one hand, its recovery yield. You want to have a downstream process that is as short as possible, but on the other hand, you also need a certain purity where you want to add additional steps at the expense of cost. And all of that know-how in scaling your fermentation process, in scaling a downstream process, of course, that does not come overnight. It is a result of doing collaborations for more than 15 years with many different partners we had. But defining a successful collaboration, that's quite difficult. It's not because you have a successful scale-up, you've done a successful scale-up, that you have also a successful product, or that your company in the end is successful. But that's why I'm proud to share one of these slides where you can see different production facilities that have been constructed or are being constructed in Europe on projects that we had the opportunity to collaborate on for their scale-up. And one very nice example I wanted to highlight is the example of Evonik for the production of rhamnolipids in Slovakia. But of course, you can imagine that until you can build a production site, it takes maybe multiple years or maybe even decades from the very first start of your development until your production plant is up and running. It takes time. So I cannot, unfortunately, show too many examples. So that's why I also brought some slides on more recent examples. And this is a shout out to Vivici also in the lab, which we've been collaborating in the past 2 to 3 years, successfully scaling their production process for beta-lactoglobulin from the lab all the way to our 75 meter cube bioreactor, and in which they are also in discussion with Liberation here to produce in the US next year. Another example, another company that we've been working in the past few years is Chromologics. It's a Danish company producing a red natural colorant through a fungal expression system, of which we collaborated with them, again from the lab to demonstration scale, which they are now doing custom manufacturing with a toller in Italy. And then my final example I wanted to share is an example a little bit closer to my hometown. It's from a startup company called Amphystar, which are producing through fermentation glycolipids, so surfactant molecules, which will also help scaling it from the lab all the way to 75,000 liter scale, so pre-commercial production scale, which help them to leverage raising their funds to produce or to set up, let's say, a demonstration production scale also in Europe as well. So if you're interested and if everything I talked interests you, I have a booth here in the other hall. I'll also be here today, tomorrow. So if you're interested in the chat, I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you very much.